Rachel, in your book, you write, "You're not broke, you're just pre-rich." And when I read that, I laughed out loud. I really did. I love it. But you also say bags of money aren't just falling from the sky. So how do we hold both truths, believing in abundance while still doing the work to become rich while we're pre-rich?
Yes. I think it's all about setting up a vision. And that's why the first chapter is about what is your $1 million dream? Like, what is that big dream that you have? And then once you have that dream, where we're not relying on vibes alone, right? To make them happen. So it's like, I've got the dream and the dream is important because it needs to be motivating, right? It needs to be something that gets you out of bed and pushes you past the challenging parts, because we know no matter what career you're building, you're going to have challenging parts. So are you motivated enough and excited enough about it to show up even when it's hard, and to like lay out your plan and work your plan, right? So it takes both. But I know for me, as a young person, I just was like, I'm going to make money, period, end of story. I'm going to keep going until I do. And that's what I did. And so I think that's the energy of like, I'm declaring that I am pre-rich at the moment, but I'm going to be rich in the near future, And I just need to show up and figure it out as I go and work towards it.
And I like that because it's a very nice balance between like faux positivity and just being like, yep, money is just going to come to me. You believe that as a result of the work you're putting into it. So you're not just waiting for it to come. You have to work for it and then it'll happen.
Yes, exactly. But it's also not just work, because the reality is that there's lots of hardworking people in the world and they are not wealthy, right? So hard work alone isn't going to do it. It's also going to require risk, really. Risk is how we build wealth, how we go from having nothing to something, right? We're risking, a real estate deal, or risking our money in the stock market, right? Like, or risking starting a new business, right? But there's always risk involved with building wealth for the first time. Not always hard work. So I think hard work is an element. I have definitely worked hard, but I also know lots of people who are working hard who ain't wealthy, So I just want people to know it's not just that alone, right? What I see as the common denominator is risk.
And I like how you specified what the risk is, because when you said when it comes to risk, I'm like, okay, well, what is risk? And what you named wasn't crazy, right? There's ups and downs, right? It's investing in the stock market, it's real estate. Yeah, starting a business, that's risky, but it's not like sell everything you have and go do. It's calculated risk, right? Is that fair?
Yes, it's being strategic, right? So we're not just going to jump off a cliff with no parachute, because that's not smart, right? So we're not going to take risks that are not likely to end up the way that we hope that they do. We're going to take smart strategic risks, and that is, there's lots of stats that show entrepreneurship actually helps you build wealth faster. Investing in the market definitely helps you build wealth faster, right? So like making these investments, taking these risks, there is a pathway already laid out. There is clues of success, right, already out there. So you don't have to do it in a way that is extremely risky, So like something that I think is more risky these days that a lot of people are talking about is crypto. But there's a lot of people who say, don't touch it, or a lot of people say only risk a small amount that you're willing to lose, that kind of thing, right? So I think we just have to get comfortable with the idea that in order to change our current state of being financially, we may have to take a risk. We may have to do something that we're uncomfortable with. We can't control every aspect of the outcome, and we're not guaranteed a specific result, and the lack of guarantee is actually what opens us up to more wealth. So it's about being strategic and having a calculated risk, but taking risks nonetheless, Even if another example would be like you have a good job, but you want to see if you can get a different job that might pay you more. It is a risk to leave where you're comfortable to go for something else, right? So like there are small and big risks that we can be taking that will help us make more money.
Future Millionaire, your book, it's bold right out of the gate. As I mentioned, you're not broke, you're pre-rich, but you also use the word inevitable a lot.
Yes.
When did you start believing wealth was inevitable for yourself? And was there a moment that kind of was that light bulb moment for you?
Yeah, it was just honestly making the decision. And for me, I was in law school. I was getting disillusioned with the idea of becoming a lawyer, mainly because a lot of the lawyers I met I didn't like, and they didn't have lives that I necessarily wanted. They didn't work at places I wanted to work. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And I read The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss back in the day when it first came out. And it just gave me some new ideas to think about building wealth. And it helped me to see that I actually have more tools available to me and more opportunity in front of me to build wealth than I even realized. And so I was like, okay, I can change my situation at any time if I choose to take action, if I choose to build something, if I choose to strategically walk towards something, I can make it happen. Now, can I guarantee when it's going to happen or exactly how it's going to happen or the exact dollar amount I'm going to make? Maybe not, but I know I can move in that direction and make things happen, And so I think at that point, I just decided like, hey, I'm not going to be broke because I don't want to be, I grew up with a lot of financial struggle and I just did not want that to be my future. I know what it looks like on the other side of not making it happen, right? And not having enough. My parents were very hardworking, but they did not have a lot of money and they barely could afford our lifestyle, right? And at times they straight up couldn't afford it. And I did not want those struggles to continue into my adulthood. And I also wanted to take care of my parents, And so I was highly motivated to change things. And I just decided I was going to. And I was going to figure it out as I went. So I was very, very interested in money, very interested in how people make money. I would ask people, I would study, I would read books, I would do whatever I can to soak up the knowledge around what does it take to make more money.
Did you end up finishing law school and taking the bar, or did you just make that left turn?
No, I did finish because I had taken out too many loans at that point to not finish. People who quit law school, y'all are brave souls. Okay, that would be another risk, right? But anyway, yes, I finished law school, graduated with a whole lot of student loans. And then I clerked for a judge for a year and then started my own solo practice. So that was that first big risk was, I read the 4-Hour Work Week and I was like, okay, I want to start my own business. That's where I got the idea to do that. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about starting a t-shirt business. I thought about all these different businesses I could start. And then I was just like, you know what? I've just practiced law for 3 years. I've passed the bar. Why don't you just sell legal services, right? Like that's a business you could start. And so that's what I decided to do.
I like that because it's kind of tiptoeing your way into the world of business and entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I would think that if you went full blown into the t-shirt business, people would be like, are you nuts? Are you not like what? There'd be a lot more defending of your actions.
Probably. And honestly, I got a logo made. I had a whole concept that I was coming up with. I hired like a designer through this website that was brand new where you could hire freelance designers. And I got t-shirts designed. And then I was like, oh, now it's time to actually print the product, like actually produce the product. And I had no money to do that. And so I was like, well, I'm not quite sure how to get around this. And then I also was like, well, how much is it going to make me? Like I really had no experience in business. And so I couldn't figure out how to get past that hurdle. I'm sure I could have figured it out if I was more motivated by that, but I wasn't. Mm-hmm. I just was like, how can I make money and be able to pay off these student loans and cover my lifestyle? And so I was like, I think it'd be a lot faster if I just sold legal services. I had some friends who were solo. I knew, attorneys that I had talked to that were willing to mentor me, that had their own practices. And so I was like, this feels more doable. I've got more resources in this area. And I've studied to become a lawyer. I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was 8 years old. Let's just do it, wow. But let's just do it on our own terms, which people still thought I was nuts, by the way. So it doesn't matter. People are always going to have opinions. You're the only one that has to live your life. So you better live it the way you want.
I was going to ask you, when you may have already answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Your book is for young people. So you're talking to children in your book. And I was going to say, if you had read your book when you were a child, would you have ended up on the same path in law school and all of that? But if you say you wanted to be a lawyer since you were 8, maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe not. Honestly, I definitely think that I would have been on the path to build wealth for sure. And I really wrote this book with, 14, 15-year-old Rachel in mind, because I was so hungry for the knowledge. I was just so aware of how painful it was to be constantly short on cash, how harsh the world is for people who are low income. And so I wanted to solve that problem and I didn't know how. So I would ask people like, what do your parents do for a living? And try to figure out like, what kind of work are you doing? Like, what kind of people make money and why, how, I really wanted to understand. I was desperate for that knowledge. And so if it would have been packaged up to me in a book like Future Millionaire, I would have been like, thank you, God. I would have done everything that it said to do in the book, And it was so cool because after the book launch, we taught this week-long course called Money Camp for young kids, like teenagers and young adults. So it's really like 13 to 27 is really the age range, which is a wide age range, but that's literally all of Gen Z right now. And so we had teenagers on the call, anywhere from like 13 to 19 and 20 something year olds and some 10-year-olds too. And some of them were true hustlers. They came and they were like, I've got a graphic design business. How should I structure my offers? They're like, I can do landscaping. I also make fonts, right? Like everybody had their own hustle. And I was like, you little hustlers, y'all would have been my best friends growing up. Like, where were y'all? When I was a kid, we would have been totally building businesses together and had so much fun. So it was really fun to see because I think there's so much knowledge so much language out there about how Gen Z is lazy. Gen Z doesn't want to work. Gen Z doesn't want to put effort in. I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of young people who want to make money, who want to learn how to do it. And they just need the tools, right? And they understand that the system isn't really working for them because really the American dream is, go to college, get a good job, buy a house, the end, right? And that is not accessible to them, right? They go to college, they graduate, there's no jobs, and not jobs that are paying what they want. And even if they get a good job, they can't afford a house because of inflation in the housing market and student loans and all of these different economic crises that they're experiencing. And so I feel like they're really disillusioned by that pathway. They see that it doesn't work, but they don't know what another pathway is. And this book gives them another pathway. And I think that's really exciting for them.
And they also have, they have the world at their fingertips, which we did not have growing up. You could create, I wouldn't even know how to create I still don't know how to create a font, but if I did, I'd be selling it to like my friends and who I play with on the weekends and my neighbors. Now they have the world that they can sell to. So the world is very accessible. So you can do these things and it's not as if you're knocking on doors. You put it online and anyone can have access to it. But then conversely, they still have the world is accessible. So they are seeing on social media these quote unquote rich people or this pressure to look rich and maybe not necessarily understanding the cost of things. So did you also see that in your camp as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're excited about the fact that they have these tools available to them. But I also, I think the fact that the world is at their fingertips is a blessing and a curse, right? Like in a lot of ways, they have tools that I didn't even have when I started my business back in 2010. And so there's all kinds of tools and resources available to them for them to use. But the world is also really overwhelming. Like every bad thing that happens in the world every day, you just see it in your feed, right? So it's like, so much bad news, so much, drama, political drama, economic drama, like just so much that they're overwhelmed with that it can be hard to focus. It can be hard to decide what to do because you're seeing almost too many examples of options, right? And so I think there's pluses and minuses, and managing that intake is part of what I'm teaching them in this book as well. Like, how can you manage yourself in this way? I mean, even older people need that, right? With this inundation of information, how do we still focus? Because it's still true that we have to focus in order to make any one thing happen. So we can't just be responding to everything coming at us. And we've got to have boundaries around what is coming in data-wise, right? And so talking about that and connecting it to their own self-care is part of how I handle that in this book. But yes, it is. There's so much opportunity and there's some disadvantage as well. And navigating that, I think, is really important.
So what advice would you give to a Gen Zer about navigating that? They're feeling the pressure of what they see online. They're watching YouTube videos of these families with all of these kids living in these big houses doing these hauls. We have to record our haul when we go shopping.
Oh my God.
I obviously have some Gen Zers in my house because I know about this stuff. And I'm just like, I'll watch it and I'll be like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is ridiculous. But how do we cut through some of that noise, but then also teach them like, this is entertainment. It's not real life too.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I teach them is inputs create outputs, right? And so like what you're putting in, what you're experiencing, that's like, what are you eating, right? What information are you taking in? What environments are you exposed to? All of that matters, and being intentional about what information that they're taking in, what they choose to believe, right? What they choose to let show up in their feed every day, I think is very important. So like if you're seeing negative stuff all the time, then you're going to feel negative, right? But if you're, curating your feed to see maybe inspiring entrepreneurs and, people who are doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing, right? Rather than just people who are like buying lots of fancy stuff or living this seemingly fancy life, getting on private jets, et cetera, right? So being strategic and intentional about what you allow to be an input in your life so that you understand that that's going to come out in one way or another. So if you want the outputs to be, well, I'm no longer broke, right? I'm on the path to becoming wealthy. Then how can we strategically curate our inputs by reading positive books, listening to podcasts where we can be learning about the topic that we want to know more about, right? Where we can follow people who are doing inspiring things, who have some kind of work ethic, et cetera. I think that's really important to understand. And I find that young people are receptive to that message, and they also do understand self-care and that it's important. And what I'm trying to explain to them is like, self-care is sleep, and filtering out the negativity and noise, and eating well and going for walks. It's not your 17-step skincare routine at night. You know what I mean? Like that's not actually that's actually work. What you're doing is work. And I don't believe it's making your skin better, I have to say.
I agree. $65 for a moisturizer or whatever my 11-year-old just asked me for. I'm just like, this isn't real life.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, part of what the problem is, they don't have a concept of money. Everything is DoorDash this and Uber that, right? They don't even touch money anymore. And so it's like, they don't have a concept of the bank account that's dwindling down every time they make an order, right? It just seems like this never ending well. So I think it's important for us as parents too, to make sure they're aware of those boundaries and shut that down and say like, here's your $20 for the week or whatever amount of money it is. And like, when it's gone, it's gone. I guess you're going to be packing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from home once it's gone. We have to set boundaries and make money real for them because the world has made it almost surreal, right? It's like connected to your Apple wallet, your phone. You don't even bring a wallet anymore. Right. You use your phone, which is connected to your parents' credit card that you just swipe whenever you feel like it. Hell no. Okay. Yeah. Shut it down.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's so it doesn't even feel real money anymore for these kids. You hold your watch up, you pay. You hold your phone up, you pay, and there's no pain. It's painless. Yes. At least like, okay, we know when we had bank accounts, we used cash, we wrote checks, we saw the money coming out of our account. Then we had credit cards, we got a bill in the mail, we had to write the check, feel the pain of writing that check for the credit card. Now your credit card comes online. It's not that painful because you just do a couple clicks, and it's just becoming less and less real. And for these kids, it's like I give my kids cash. Like I make them hold on to it, keep money in your, they don't even use wallets anymore. Everything's in the phone case. They stuff the money in their phone case. And so making it money real, and it's not this endless supply. Like my daughter asked me something, and I think how much something cost. And I said, oh, it's like $30 or something like that, which was expensive. Oh, that's not bad. I go, you don't even know what bad is. You don't know. You have no concept. How do you know? You don't even know.
That's not bad. Do you have a job? Do you know that people are working and making $15 an hour? That's 2 hours of work, you know?
Yes.
For that $30 thing. Like, I hope it's a good thing that you really want, you know?
Exactly. So how do we have these conversations and make money real for our children when like society's is the headwind against us, pushing against us?
Yeah. So I think it's two things. I think if your kids are still young, for young kids, what I do is we pay for grades. So we motivate them, like we want them to be incentivized. And I really learned this because with my team, I have a team of employees and they have, they get certain incentives when they hit their metrics, right? And I was like, I could do this at home. So I decided to do the same thing with my children. And I said, I pay for A's and A's only. You know, so I will pay you a certain dollar amount for every A you bring home. And if you bring nothing but A's home, we pay $100 per A. And honestly, my husband set that price, which was kind of high. So you could do 10, you could do $20, you know, you could kind of go up and down. But we pay $100 for every A for their like semester report card, not just every quiz, because otherwise we'd be broke. They would have all our money. But anyway, so we pay for the semester $100 per A and $1,000 for a full sweep. So if you get all A's, you get $1,000, right? Wow. And so they have trimesters. So they have 3 opportunities to do this in a school year. Okay. And they have quickly figured out, I like those A's and I like the dollars that come with that. So now they all bring home full A's, which I'm like, great. That was the desired result. And then they get this $1,000. And so what we do is we take 500 of it and they have to invest it. And we show them. So like we're logging onto Charles Schwab, right? Putting, you know, transferring the money, showing them like we're buying this index fund. Let's look at what the money we put in last time is doing. Oh, look, it's gone up, right? Like I want them to physically see it so they get how it works, right? So that's one thing. And they hate it. They want to spend that $500. And I'm like, no way, you know, delayed gratification. So I let them feel the discomfort of that. The other half, they get to decide how to spend it. Right. But we don't pay for anything. So that, you know, when they're like, hey, I need new shoes. I'm like, great, you got money. Buy your shoes, you know? Or they're like, hey, can I get art supplies? My daughter always wants art supplies because she's always making things, you know? And so I'm like, you got money. I'll take you to go get your yarn or whatever you need, but like, I'm not paying for it. And so teaching them to manage their money. And sometimes they blow the whole thing on something and then they're filled with regret. Great. Yes. I want you to feel that regret, you know? Good, you know, or they spend all their money on something and they're like, I'm bummed I can't buy this other thing, but I really love this thing I bought, so I'm okay with it. Cool, right? Like, understand, like, the money you have is finite, and I'm not giving you any more, and you got to use it. So that's really what we do. And I think with older children, you've got to start cutting them off, right? Yeah. At a certain point, you have to say, like, hey, you got to get a part-time job. And that part-time job you're going to use to pay for whatever, you know, going to the movies with your friends, your Ubers, whatever. I'm not paying for it. I'm not door dashing you until you're 27, you know, like hell no. Okay. And so that's what we did. So our oldest, you know, she came to a certain age and we said, okay, you can continue to live here, but we're going to charge you rent. And it was a very nominal rent. It was not market rent, obviously. Right. And she was like, well, I don't want to pay it. And so we were like, okay, well, if you live here, you have to pay it. And if you decide you don't want to pay it, then you can go live somewhere else. But like, we're trying to prepare for the real world. So like, you're gonna have to pay bills when you leave here. So you're gonna have to pay bills here. You're an adult with a full-time job. Get out of here. You know? So she decided she was gonna move. And I'm like, great. You know, that's a good outcome. So I think we have to start scaling back because we're not going to just one day turn off the faucet, right? And we also can't keep it going forever. So at some point we have to start slowly turning off the faucet till the point where we turn it off altogether, because otherwise these kids will live in our houses forever, right? And how is that going to impact our ability to save for retirement, right? Even our relationships with our children, because at a certain point they're adults and they want to do things their way. Great, do it in your house your way. In my house, it's still my way. See how that works? So I think these are important. I feel like parents are not, you know, turning off the faucet. And that's part of the problem where these kids are not getting these money lessons until much later in life when they are more high stakes.
I completely agree. In my house, we pay for report cards. I'll buy you something, and it usually ends up being something like I was going to buy them anyway, so it works out for me in the end, like a new pair of shoes or something like that. But then I also give them, there's so many different ways to do allowance, right? Or giving your kids money. And I love talking about all of that because and you could even treat your kids differently based on the way they handle money or their money mindset.
Right.
If I know my one daughter, if I gave her $500, it's going to be spent, even before it hits our Apple wallet or, whatever. So I have to, maybe spread it out a little bit or, really have to guide her with the decisions. But what it does is it makes money thoughtful, like making
Yes.
decisions about it. The delayed gratification, they can't screw things up that bad, right? They
Right.
spend it all, worst case scenario, they spend it all in a week, and then they're feeling the pain of going the rest of the semester without money. Then they're going to remember that lesson. But I think the
Yes.
beauty of that is they can't really screw it up too bad. You're helping them, you're investing for them. Their future self is going to be very grateful, but then you're allowing them to make choices. And I feel like a lot of
Yes.
kids aren't being forced to make those choices today with money.
Yeah, and with a lot of things. I mean, there's all kinds of stats showing that like parents are so controlling in their physical environment, but not controlling enough in the digital environment, right? And so I think we need to let our kids walk to the store by themselves at a certain age, put their money down, choose what they're going to buy, and deal with the consequences of that, right? Like we have to allow them to start having some level of autonomy so that they can figure this out for themselves and learn how to make decisions. One of the things that I talk about in the book is creating a decision log, right? Like, so once a month, look back and say, okay, the decisions I made to buy that outfit, right? Or to go with my friends to this party or whatever it is, to not buy something or to quit my job, right? They could look back at some of their top financial decisions they might have made in the last month and say, how do I feel about that today? With a little distance, am I proud of that decision? Do I regret that decision? What do I want to do differently going forward? Right. And that's how we learn, is by making decisions and looking back on them and saying, did that go the way that I hoped? No? Okay, great. Now I know, and now I will do it differently going forward. So it's really teaching kids how to be intentional in general
Mm-hmm.
in their lives. And if their parents are doing everything for them and making every decision for them, then they never get to learn that, right? Until they're much, much older, where the stakes are higher, right? There's more risk involved. So I'd rather them learn now when they still got a roof over their head and, and parents guiding them.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the essential money convos parents should be having with their kids? Obviously, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, your advice is first, figure out a way to give your kids some type of money so that it allows them to make some decisions. Then you can guide through the decisions with them and help them. But what other conversation should we be having with our children?
Yeah. So one, the first thing I think we should do is definitely start with their dream. Like, what do you hope for yourself? What do you imagine your life to be like when you're older? Let's talk about what your dream is and what your vision is for your life. We're not doing that enough. I feel like we're usually saying we can't afford it, or no, that's not possible, or that's unlikely. We're usually sort of like the wet blanket shutting down so much. And I want to invite parents to say, like, no, of course that's possible. Tell me what you want to do. And no matter how, even if it sounds absurd, don't poo-poo their dreams. I mean, we live in a world where, who knows? I saw Gary Vee said the other day that he thinks our grandchildren will be marrying robots. So like that's where he thinks we are at this point, that people will be in full sale relationships with AI. And so I'm like, we don't know what world is going to be created. We don't actually know what is possible or not for our children. So if they have a vision for their life that they want, we should encourage them in that, as long as it's ethical and not, criminal activity, right? And so encourage them in that, and then say, okay, what's actually required to make that possible? You want to be a famous YouTuber? You want to play video games for a living? You want to be a famous, football player? Okay, great. What does it look like to make that happen? Let's look at people who are doing that, right? Do they practice often? What kinds of classes do they take? What kind of things do they study in school? Let's like deconstruct that dream and say, what effort is required to make it happen? So that's where I think it begins, so that you have a target that you're working on with them together, right? Like, this is your goal in life, and I'm here to help make it happen for you. Like, I'm here to help support you as you make it happen. So I think that's the first step. That's the key. And then also just, as they're going to college, making sure that they are thinking about, okay, what is something practical that you could learn? What's a marketable skill that you could gain while you're in law school, right? A lot of people want to study 17th century English or something like that. But it's like, what can you do with that when you leave? So I want kids to leave college with marketable skills, right? Like, you know how to draft plans, right? In architecture, or how to take photographs, or how to write. some skill that they could sell, they could turn into a business as a freelancer if they wanted to, because that's real job security when you know you have a skill that you can sell. So that's one thing I want kids to get from college. And then the other thing is a network, right? Because 80% of jobs are not being advertised. So the more you can build your professional network, the more likely you're going to be able to find a job when you finish college. So making sure that when they go to college that they are, intentionally networking, going to those events, meeting people, setting up informational interviews, applying for those internships, making sure that they're building that professional network, because that's likely what's going to lead to their first job.
So for my listeners right now that say, well, I don't have kids, but I'm actually learning a lot from this conversation right now. For people who feel like they're missing the boat, what lessons from Future Millionaire still apply to us, the grown-ups?
Yes, as adults, yes.
Yes.
Well, I think for some of us, right, yes, it's like we're in jobs that we thought were going to turn into something that they didn't, or, we had a setback in our career, or we pivoted in our career and now we're starting, back at the bottom, or we never started investing. And so I think the key I think there's so much in the book that's really valuable. But one of the most valuable things is, one, really assessing yourself. Where are the assets that we need to capitalize on, right? And so we need to study ourselves and say, what am I good at? What have I always been drawn to as a child? What skills do I have? What experiences have I acquired? And how can I turn that into value? How can I sell that and have it generate money for me, right? So one of the things that I always do with my clients is have them take strengths finders, have them take Colby, DISC, whatever assessments they can to learn more about themselves and how they like to work. Because I do believe that your wealthiest self is the version that is happiest as well. So if you're doing something that requires so much discipline because you secretly hate it, or maybe not so secretly, it's very common that people hate their jobs. And I'm like, you know what? Not if you want to make $1 million, right? You're not going to do it long enough, right? So like if we can get people into careers that they love, that they would be doing this even if they weren't getting paid, you're more likely to keep growing and building on that and become world-class at it, and therefore get paid more. So that would be one, is like assess what your genius is and see if you can connect that to a need in the marketplace if you're an entrepreneur, or a job that you would really enjoy doing and that you could get paid well to do. So that's one. And then the next thing is really like replacing this idea of the American dream, like the get a good job, buy a house, with a different strategy, which is, get the job, use the job to be your seed capital, right? Sometimes I think the way we think about work is like the job is the end all be all. I'm going to do this. I'm going to retire. I'm going to invest, blah, 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 right? No. In my formula, the job is just one piece of it, right? So you get the job because you need the initial capital. Then you take some of the money from the job and you start a side hustle and diversify how you generate money. Doesn't need to be something that is like it absolutely shouldn't be a second full-time job, right? It should be something that feels like fun. Like it could be event planning or social media management or something else that is almost like a hobby that you would do for free, but you're getting paid for it, something that feels fun. And so you have this extra way to bring in extra cash. You take that extra cash and you use that to invest, right? Typically in the stock market, but you could invest in real estate or something else as well. But that way you're checking all of these boxes. You've got a steady paycheck and you're using that to pay your living expenses. But most people cannot afford to, they're barely getting by, right? So they don't have the money to invest. So you take some of that money, like a little bit of the money you have, and you use it to start a side hustle to generate that extra income that you can use for vacations, pleasure, joy, helping your kids go to school, right? Something like that. And then you take part of the money that you're making, the profits that you're making from your business, and you invest, right? So that you're checking all those boxes. You get to be an owner, you get to be an investor, and you're an employee. And some people, if you love this business and it does well, you can quit the job and just do that full time and also invest. But I think that's the realistic formula that works today. Most of us are not getting all of our needs met from one full-time job, unfortunately.
So we talked about the American dream, buy a house, any combination of buy a house, go to college, get a good job, white picket fence kind of thing.
Happily ever after, yes.
Happily ever after. That's the American dream. What is going to be the new American dream, do we think?
Yes, this new formula, I think it actually is. Already 50% of Americans have a side hustle. So like, people used to ask me like, are your clients people who work in corporate or are they entrepreneurs? I'm like, they're both. They do both. Right. So people who have full-time jobs, but they have a side hustle to bring in extra money because they know the job is not doing everything that they want to do. It's not making enough money come in so that they can check these other boxes and do these other things that are important to them. Or they just want to have options because they know people are getting laid off, right? Things happen even with a job that are outside of your control. And if you've already got an established side hustle that's bringing in some extra cash, like, okay, I've got a little bit of a safety net there. So a lot of people are doing it that way already. And then I think the key is then take some of that money and become an investor so that that money can be growing without your labor, which is the ultimate goal. I mean, this is how we truly build wealth, is separating our labor from our earnings, right? So if we can be earning when we're not working, that's the game changer, because there's only so much labor we can do in a week. And eventually we won't want to do any at all.
What is one unconventional piece of advice from Future Millionaire that will make everyone rethink what they've known about money from the past?
Interesting. What's one unconventional piece of advice? Well, one is make $1 million decisions. I think, a lot of the conversation around money is always sort of save. It's like 401ks and IRAs, and it's all about like, how can we cut up the paycheck you have to, make these smart decisions, right? Like that's always sort of like the mindset around it. It's kind of like, we've got this finite pie. That's all we're working with. And then what are all the things that we need to do with it? And I feel like because of that, the conversation can be very focused on scarcity, right? Like there's limits, there's not enough, there's never enough, right? And I think it causes people to just like shrink their lives, shrink what they feel is possible for themselves, make their dreams smaller to fit into the size of their paycheck. And I disagree. I'm like, listen, we get one wild and precious life. And I'm not like, YOLO, right? Like spend whatever you want. But I do feel like we need to have a more abundant mindset. And so one of the things that I teach in almost every one of my books is making $1 million decisions. So what's a decision that creates more abundance, that feels expansive, that doesn't shrink your life, but expands your life and expands your opportunities, right? And so sometimes that decision is not saving and investing. Sometimes that, I shouldn't say investing, but saving and squirreling everything away. Sometimes that decision is taking the money and spending it, right? So it could be like, hey, I have this opportunity to, there's this thing that I'm really interested in. I have a natural skill at something, and I could take this course to get even better at it. And then I could sell that skill and make more money. For most personal finance advice, it would be like, no, don't spend that money, right? Save it. And whereas I say, no, spend the money. If it's $1,000 course, take the $1,000 course so that you can learn how to make $1,000 every month, right? Like an extra $1,000 monthly. So I do think it's important that we make decisions that push us towards abundance so that we could live the full lives that we want, and that the solution to everything isn't save, So I do like to save. I like to have cash sitting, just like everybody else, but it is not the only goal. And I would have never even gotten to a place where I could have savings if I wasn't willing to invest in myself and like learn the skills I need to learn in order to build a successful business.